It's Britney, bitch! It's the Bipolar Index for cataloging madness, and today we're flipping to G. I honestly don't know why I'm touching on guardianships. The topic isn't particularly personal to me, but guardianship isn't one of those systems most people really think about until a celebrity case explodes in the news or until it touches their own lives. And living with a severe mental illness while also living with family can sometimes have interesting impacts on how autonomous I really feel as an adult. Sometimes it can feel like my behavior, mood, life and financial decisions are all under a microscope with someone scanning for the slightest indication that shit's about to go downhill. Do I feel comforted that I have a support system? Absolutely. Do I sometimes wish I could paint outside the lines without someone pointing out that the clock came out wonky? Yeah. So I want to explore a couple of examples of some famous guardianships, and then also ground them within a larger context of how we define, approach, and treat disability clinically, socially, and even legally. First, let's situate where guardianships came from. In James E. Moran's Care and Protection, Managing Madness in England, we come to understand that a long legal tradition of civil lunacy laws predates modern psychiatry. The lunacy law begins in medieval England, where courts used legal procedures to determine whether a person was not of sound mind. And once they were declared insane, the state would appoint committees to manage the person's properties and affairs. So two things jump out at us here. One, property management was the core concern. And two, madness was legally negotiated, not medically diagnosed. So often, guardianship decisions were embedded within family conflicts, class interests, and social norms, not medical necessity. So after a series of legislative reforms, governance over insanity transformed from a family court issue into part of an emerging psychiatric state. And that brings us to Kim E. Nielsen's Incompetent and Insane: Labor, Ability, and Citizenship in the 19th and early 20th century United States. Here, Nielsen shows us how the American legal system expanded these early lunacy frameworks into broader politics of ability and citizenship. They explained that incompetent and insane were not just medical classifications, but legal statuses that determined who could participate fully in a society. And capability, and I put that in air quotes, becomes tied to productivity and independence. Industrial capitalism ushered in a new ideal of self-sufficiency and labor production as a marker of citizenship. So once declared incompetent, individuals could lose the ability to not only control property, but also to sign contracts, vote, and make medical or personal decisions. Because people with severe mental illnesses were seen as threats to social order, and so control over categorization of disability and insanity became part of state population management. And from there, I want to touch on a really influential book in this space, Ron Whippen's Your Consent is Not Required: The Rise in Psychiatric Detentions, Forced Treatment, and Abusive Guardianships. Whippen presents that even though large asylums were decommissioned in the mid-20th century following a wave of deinstitutionalization, legal coercion in psychiatry transformed. And in fact, Whippen argues that more people are subjected to coercive interventions now than during the era of the asylum through the practices of hospitals, residential facilities, and community programs. But what's driving this expansion? Well, for one, broad legal standards for intervention create vague criteria for detention and give psychiatrists, police, and courts wide discretion. Two, institutional incentives expand involuntary detentions. And three, modern psychiatric law allows for individuals to lose bodily autonomy and legal rights without committing a crime through civil incarceration based on interactions with schools, families, and workplaces, etc. So it's not just a mental health crisis. Alex Barnard's Conservatorships Inside California's System of Coercion and Care for Mental Illness also examines modern conservatorships as a legal arrangement. Their key finding is that conservatorships is the endpoint of a long institutional pipeline where there are stages before reaching court hearings on a decision of control. Between police encounters, emergency psychiatric holds, hospitalizations, the decision-making becomes fragmented. And although judges approve or deny the conservatorships, the outcome depends on the actions of many other actors, like psychiatrists, police, social workers, family members, etc. Often this means that the system can become inconsistent if any of the actors push the case forward or even halt it. Ultimately, Barnard argues that in the case of California, the state has largely abdicated responsibility and instead delegates a conservatorship's operation to a network of public and private institutions, leaving outcomes wholly dependent on local resources and financial incentives. Because of this, while sometimes conservatorships can stabilize a person, often they produce neglect and confinement, as well as abuse. This brings me to Adrian Ward's abolition of all guardianship and mental health laws. In the article, Ward explores an argument that emerges from disability rights and psychiatric survivor movements, which claims that traditional guardianship regimes fundamentally violate autonomy. The core abolitionist critiques shouldn't be that surprising to us as we've unpacked the history. 1. Guardianship replaces legal personhood and effectively erases legal agency. 2. Coercive care reproduces historical abuses and draws parallels to early asylum regimes by continuing forms of confinement and control. And 3. Rather than transferring legal authority to a guardian, reformers advocate for a system of assistance. People retain their legal rights but get help in making decisions. Truly, I think Ward is just exploring whether guardianship laws can ever reconcile protection with autonomy. And they question whether the system is fundamentally unjust. Now, the cases of Britney Spears and Wendy Williams brought these tensions into public view. Because of their visibility, there have been many debates over whether the system should be reformed or fundamentally dismantled. Spears' conservatorship lasted over a decade, despite being posed as temporary, and while she continued to work and make millions, it raised questions about how courts define incapacity. This led to the #FreeBritney movement, and in 2021, Spears testified that the arrangement had been coercive and exploitative. The court terminated the conservatorship because of this. And Williams' case reveals similar tensions in New York City's legal framework. Williams publicly contested her situation, arguing that it restricts her independence and isolates her. And while she is still battling to terminate her ongoing guardianship, some reform proposals, informally referred to as Wendy's Law, seek to increase transparency and oversight of guardianships in New York City as a whole. The goal is to protect against social isolation for people placed under these arrangements, even for the thousands of people whose stories rarely make headlines. Taken together, this history and these cases show that guardianship has never simply been about care. And the question raised by disability scholars and activists is simple but uncomfortable. If autonomy can be removed so easily in the name of protection, what safeguards actually exist to ensure the system protects people rather than controls them?